So the Paris Commune came after decades of authoritarianism in France. What happened was that in the 1848, France was in a state of crisis. The economy was doing poorly, and there were these worker insurrections that were coming up. So it wasn't quite clear where France was going to go from that. Some people thought that France was going to go into revolution because all of Europe was going into revolution. Some people thought that the French economy would collapse altogether. So in this context, the nephew of the old Napoleon Bonaparte, the great post-revolutionary emperor of France, comes up, and he's able to take control of the French parliament and then abolish the parliament altogether. And he declares himself the emperor of France. And in some ways, Bonaparte was actually quite popular. He was able to maintain a pretty decent control over the press, and because of that, most of the rural population of France, the French peasantry as they called it, had a very positive opinion of him. They thought that he would be almost like the second coming for France. And he had this very majestic image amongst them, being the descendant of this great general that they remember as being somehow emblematic of the French peasantry, being very noble and expansive and powerful. Now this of course continued for quite some time, but unfortunately this didn't stop the crisis that happened in France, but just in the eyes of many historians it just stalled it for quite some period of time. The French basic economic system was still doing quite poorly, and this vision of this great leader who was going to save France and bring France to like the golden age once again, that never happened, and it just brought France into more and more wars. The worst, of course, was the Battle of Sudan. Basically, Prussia, who's becoming an emerging power and was eventually going to become the central kingdom that would bring Germany all together, it looked like there was going to become a competition for France. And while Bonaparte himself felt that getting into war with Prussia was a bad idea, his reputation as a soldier and as someone's grand led to this very popular support for a war between Prussia and France. And as a result, Napoleon entered into war with Prussia and lost terribly. He himself was captured. France was quite humiliated, and one of the reasons why the Paris Commune could happen was because the French army was actually was not allowed to have armaments anymore, leaving only the Paris-based National Guard as being the only real armed group that was there in France. So because of all of this, even though France just had a very authoritarian regime coming just before that, it just created conditions where the crisis just got worse and worse and worse, leading to the insurrection that created the Paris Commune. So the Paris Commune was actually started because of women's organizations. There's this very famous women's movements leader, Louise Michel, and she was someone who really were able to organize a lot of women together. In fact, when the Paris Commune, just before it started, the government tried to recall all the weapons that the communists had already had. And Louise Michel organized like an entire mob of women who made sure that the army was not able to recall those weapons. When they stood in front of the army and told them that if they wanted to take the weapons, they would have to take their lives first. And the army men who were sent to do it were ordered to fire, but they said that they would not fire on a group of unarmed women. And they actually turned against the French government, and that's how the Paris Commune started. When the Paris Commune actually functioned, women were not given the right to vote. This might seem very strange because, like, when we imagine French society, we imagine French society right now to be very liberal, and in some sense there'd be a strong tradition of feminism. But sometimes we forget that women didn't get the right to vote in France until after World War II. It was actually a very late runner in that sense. But And while the male leaders of the commune may not have been particularly feminist, there was a lot of space that was being created within the commune for women to organize. So many of them used to organize these workshops and these rallies within abandoned churches within the commune. They would organize workshops, and they would start making demands also of the commune as a whole. Their demands were both for women and for children. So they demanded that women and men be given equal pay for equal work. They tried to end any forms of overt discrimination of women based off of marital status. They said that children should be guaranteed, child labor first off had to be abolished altogether, but children should be given a universal guarantee of education and of clothing. And whether the child was born in marriage or out, the child should be entitled to the same basic rights within society. So in that sense, the women within the Paris Commune were they agitated for equality between the sexes and some sort of freedoms and rights to be given for the children. The Paris Commune as a whole tried to organize the education for the children. They tried a very innovative style of education. They wanted to make sure that children were really, like, their education was supposed to really bring them into the community. So they wanted their education to have both the theory of how the commune ran, and they wanted them to actually know how the factories would operate. So in that sense, it was a nice combination of practical and theoretical education. And just remember, this is not something that happened over years. The commune itself only lasted about 10 weeks. So they were able to develop this much and progress this much in such a short period of time. Had the commune lasted much longer, who knows, like, where the women's movement within the commune would have been. Who knows what the education system for children would have been within the commune. These are all speculations we can do at this point in time. But it shows actually what happens when people are able to control their own fate. So this is something that we can really learn from the commune. The commune was run very democratically. And when I say democratically, I mean from ground up. So even though women didn't necessarily have the right to vote for representatives within the commune council, the Union des Femmes, was Louise Michel's group, were able to agitate outside of that and were able to show up out the council itself and make their demands directly to the council. So there was a very militant women's movement. When the French army cracked down on the commune, there were women fighters fighting alongside the men, saying that, like, we're fighting for our space as much as those of our brethren. And we were, and in that sense, there was an incumbent feminist ethos that was developing within the commune. The commune was also known to be very cosmopolitan. It wasn't like this isolated, xenophobic region. People were visiting from outside. There were talks about trying to work in coordination with other groups, trying to replicate the model in other places. The factories in the commune were also incredibly efficient. Because of the poor economy in France, the war with Prussia really bankrupted the Paris economy. Many factories were shut down. When the commune was in operation, people started taking control over these factories and trying to repurpose them basically to deal with the local needs of the people, and then trying to work towards developing trade with other areas. These factories, I think there was something about 70 or 80 of them in total across the city. They were run in a very democratic way. So it's not like the owner of the, like today we think that the owner of the factory can, like a dictator, tell people in the factory how it's supposed to run. In the Paris Commune, it was actually run through a democratic council. You were people on the shop floor were able to vote and discuss what the factory was supposed to provide. Through the city council, they were able to coordinate with other factories to make sure that the needs that they produced were somehow complementary with each other. It's not like today where a factory is expected to just produce as much as possible irrespective of what people's needs. This was actually constantly repurposed in order to deal with the needs of the community. So what is the legacy of the Paris Commune? The Paris Commune was this very inspirational example of how from the center of a very industrialized country, workers could control and run successfully, at least for as brief as it was, for a reasonable amount of time, and what the benefits of that would be. There were many schools of socialism that tried to learn lessons from the Commune, first trying to understand what worked and also how it fell apart. This became influential in the First International, and movements across the world became influenced by it. First, it was an example of how when workers directly control the means of production and decide on their own how things are going to get run. Karl Marx famously said that this is what the dictatorship of the proletariat is supposed to be. It's when people are not forced into following certain kinds of rules, but rather can say on their own terms, this is what things should be. The only problem, of course, is how does one replicate such an example in other places? And for there, Marxism took its own theory to a different level and tried to get into questions about how one restructures the state to make it such that people can actually take direct control over it. There are also other branches that tried to create insurrections in different parts of Europe and tried to see if one could create an insurrection like that in Paris. None of them really panned out to anything much, but every time insurrections like this happened, some workers' consciousness was developed, and the rights and the respect that workers would have in different parts of Europe actually started going up. Most famous example, of course, is a series of movements that started off in Spain, which by the time of World War II became the basis of the Spanish Civil War, where for about a year there were sections of Spain that were part of a similar sort of commune, so the entire section of a country. Stories, of course, also had reached America, leading to workers' uprisings that were there, where workers said that in the way that slaves was the buying and selling of people's lives, the capitalist wage system was the renting of people's lives, and in many ways just as illegitimate. And this led to many protests that would happen in the United States, where workers said that they should be able to directly control things. And that also is linked to the formation of Labor Day, or May Day as we understand it today. So remember that at the beginning of May, the first week of May is when the Paris Commune was demolished by the French army. It's also the anniversary of many workers' movements since then, to commemorate the coming together of workers in building and creating a better society. The Paris Commune is also this historical example that people can keep pointing to about how when workers take control over the means of production, it is possible not only for them to grow and thrive, but also to expand and bring other sectors and other regions into its ambit. There was like a sense that the Paris Commune could have grown had it given enough time, and that it had to be violently suppressed in order for it to exist. And since then, many other people's-led movement have been compared to the Paris Commune. The question, of course, is what does the meaning of the Paris Commune in today's context? And today's context, we have to ask this question of whether it is possible for workers or people who are poor to have any sort of agency in our economy today. And the only way one can go about that is by learning at least how the people of the Paris Commune were trying to make things more democratic. And it starts off in a factory, it starts off in a local context where you trust that even though you may have these grander visions of development or justice in mind, it is possible for people to organically and spontaneously come to those ways of doing it. If the institutions are just right and people are actively able to participate in what's going on, people can create things like this. There's been a question about, of course, whether today we'll see anything like the Paris Commune. And in spots you see little things here and there, but nothing quite capturing the imagination the way the Paris Commune did. The story of the Paris Commune should ultimately be a story of hope for all of us. The French Revolution was apparently the center of the feudalist European empires, and it gave way to democratic ideals. And after that, Paris was the industrial center of Europe, and it gave way to a workers' uprising. So even in the most intense center of an authoritarian regime, it is possible for people to come together and create something new and better. And even though the world right now seems to be in a place where authoritarian regimes are coming up, in the sense that notions of human rights, human dignity, xenophobia, and economic strangleholds that inequality provides seems to be at its most intense, maybe more intense than it's ever been in the history of the world. Something new may come out of it, if of course we have some faith in the people.